Good morning friends, you are most welcome to Civil Affairs channel. Today we are going to discuss Social Anthropology by MAAN IGNOU and our topic is Comparative Ethnography MANE003. Subtopic is Class. Let us discuss it. First we will discuss introduction part, then we will discuss theoretical part of which the ethnography, caste, class and power changing patterns of stratification in a Tanjore village is an example. Description of the ethnography, intellectual context, fieldwork, analysis of data and conclusion. How does the ethnography advance our understanding? Theoretical part of which the ethnography, Siva and her sisters, gender, caste and class in rural South India is an example. Description of the ethnography, intellectual context, fieldwork, analysis of data and conclusion. How does the ethnography advance our understanding? At the last we will discuss the summary. Learning objectives are after reading this unit you will be understand the place of political organization and class in society, application of the tripartite model to the understanding of social stratification and feminist perspective in the understanding of politics, class and caste. Introduction part. Human societies show many ways of creating inequality, some of which are based on birth and some on criteria other than birth. Class is one phenomena usually associated with income and occupation. It may also be noted that class does not only deal with economy but with a style of living, dress, taste and interest and many other non-material characteristics. Scholars who have studied the class phenomena in depth, like French anthropologists and philosophers Pierre Bourdieu, point to the mysterious ways in which class may manifest itself, like a quality that is quite indescribable yet collectively understood by the members of a society. In most societies, class may intersect with other social criteria like race and caste that may be viewed as ascriptive qualities but which nevertheless underline considerations of class. For example, the whites are rich. The Brahmins in South India are landowners. In India, caste has a definite correlation with class, as the lower caste are also associated with occupations and lifestyles that put them at the lower end of the social ladder and their ways of life are looked down upon by the upper caste who also consider themselves refined and sophisticated. We have selected two ethnographies to illustrate the relationship between class and caste, and both are based upon fieldwork done in South India, yet they differ significantly from each other. The first one, published in 1965, is based upon fieldwork done in a village, Sripuram, situated in Tanjore district of Tamil Nadu, and the second was published in 1995 and is based upon a field study done in Arulur, a village situated close to the earlier field area in Tiruchirappalli in Tamil Nadu. However, apart from the more or less same geographical and cultural area, there are significant differences between the two ethnographies. Caste, Class and Power by Andre Bitale was done in a positivist style by a male author. Siva and Her Sisters is a feminist and phenomenological study done by a women scholar with an explicit goal of studying class and caste from a gendered perspective. Unlike the formal and objective analysis of the first ethnography, the second one is reflexive but based upon substantive data and detailed economic analysis. Theoretical part of which the ethnography, caste, class and power changing patterns of stratification in the Tanjore village is an example. This book sets about to do what may be called a formal structural analysis of social relationships existing in the universe under study. Bitale was strongly influenced by the works of Radcliffe Brown and M.N. Srinivas and works within the larger theoretical framework set by these scholars in the 60s based upon the works of McKim, Marriott, Maurice Opler and others. The Indian village was recognized as not being a bonded unit but part of a larger whole. The main theme of the book is understanding social stratification. Description of the ethnography, intellectual context. Andre Vitali's work is concerned with the phenomena of caste, class, and power and their changing relations. It is work on the changing aspects of social stratification. The impact of Max Weber on this work is clearly seen. Fieldwork. The fieldwork in Sripuram was carried out over a period of 10 months in 1961 and 1962 using the standards anthropological methods. Analysis of data. The village is stratified into three major caste based divisions: the Brahmin, the non Brahmin, and the Adi Dravidas, the lower caste. This is not a study completely synchronic in nature but a study of social change where the author has analyzed the changes that have come in the relations of caste, class, and power by the external intervention of variables such as formal education, availability of caste free jobs, and the commoditization of land that has made it possible for land to be bought and sold. The earlier system was based on the traditional division of occupations, in which everyone was dependent upon the agrarian economy. The major line of argument followed by the author is that while the earlier system was totally governed by caste and the power hierarchy was parallel to the caste hierarchy, with the entry of the open market and parliamentary democracy, the power structure is moving towards class but not quite independent of the traditional caste based hierarchies, yet not quite synonymous with it either. However, although the Varna system recognizes the Brahmins to be at the top, the actual land ownership or class position of the Brahmins may not coincide with their ritual position. It is the non Brahmins, excluding the lower layer of Adi Dravidas, who are both numerically strong and include landowners as wealthy as the Brahmins. These encompass the landowning and cultivating caste as well as the traders, artisans, and some like the Kalas possess considerable political clout. The lowest layer of the untouchables consists of those who are both economically and socially depressed. In dealing with caste hierarchy, Bitale has taken into account the contestation and multiple factors influencing caste positions. He nowhere supports the idea that caste system is rigid and highly structured. In his account of the village, also he acknowledges that the village is not enclosed but as a society open to outside influences and factors. Thus, even while following a structural functional approach in principle, he goes beyond the class synchronic and equilibrium model to include the facts of history, mobility, and conflict in his analysis of agrarian caste relations. Similarly, he looks deep into the complex organization of caste, taking into account the inner divisions of particular caste like the Brahmins and the dynamics of interaction that characterizes the intra-caste relations as well as the inter-caste relationship. There is tendency to emphasize the harmonious and functional aspect of caste, like the economic interdependence that is born out of the injunction on various castes not engaging in certain activities. Thus, the Brahmin has to depend on the non-Brahmin to plug his land, as a Brahmin cannot touch a plug or will lose his caste status. Similarly, the other village level workers like washermen, potters, ironsmiths, leather workers, etc., engage in works that are prohibited to other caste groups, thus creating a web of economic and ritual interdependence. But he does recognize that the working of the system is far from ideal and many do not conform to the ideals of their caste occupation. Like the Brahmins are not always engaged in rituals activities, but they do work towards keeping alive the great traditions. The author gives us a detailed picture of land ownership and agricultural economy of the village, but he too realizes that the picture cannot be accurate. He writes, for example, that it is not possible to give accurate data of land holdings as land is often held in names others than that of the actual owner because of the government imposition of land ceilings. Moreover, in the period in which this work was done, the situation had already become dynamic and land had ceased to be a static and fixed asset, changing hands at quite a fast pace. Moreover, what was more important was that with the advent of formal education and opportunities for entering into various occupations of high status, land ceased to have its importance as the sole criteria for marking economic status, yet as Bitalis observes, in spite of all transformations in the variables determining status that had begun to incorporate political power and occupational status outside the caste system, the traditional landholding caste continued by and large their privileged positions, confirming the correspondence between caste and class. The nexus of being upper caste and upper class continued well into Indian society even when new status criteria demarcating status began to crop up. The reasons being that when new opportunities came up, the really bottom layer, namely of the untouchables, had no chance to avail of them, a fact that will be confirmed by our second ethnography also. Since he is talking about agrarian structure, Bataille does reflect upon a Marxist analysis also, although he does not endorse it mainly because, as he points out, the cleavages in this society were not really about class about but about caste. Moreover, he points out that because people pass quite rapidly out of one class into another, they never get to develop class consciousness. He is of the opinion that instead of class conflict, the conflict, even though class based, assumes at the conscious level the form of caste conflict. He is of the opinion that instead of class conflict, the conflict, even though class based, assumes at the conscious level of the form of caste conflict. He does treat the agricultural labor as a class, although he deals with this category in a formal manner. He mentioned the lack of security and the meager amount paid to them, yet he refrains from making any comment on exploitation or social justice. He treats the field area truly like an object to be looked at without my emotion, my emotional, any emotional or ethical involvement. He treats the field area truly like an object to be looked at without any emotional or ethical involvement. He treats inequality merely as a structural phenomena and pays analytical attention to it. He has mentioned all the factors leading to inequality in the systems, including the practice of the landowners being the moneylenders who also charged exorbitant rates of interest, but the terms such as suffering or hardship are not mentioned at all. The overall dynamics of the field area has been incisively analyzed. Speaking of the landowning caste, three phases are identified. The first being more or less the harmonious situation where the landowners or the landlords were tied to the land and had interdependency with their tenants. The second, when the landlords moved away from the rural society into urban area and became absentee landlords. And the third phase, recent according to his own fieldwork time, when the landlords were thinking of permanently moving out of the village and have begun to sell off their land. This land then passes into the hands of relatively small landowners who can be both owners and owner cultivators. The landowners can be divided into rentiers and farmers, the former not cultivating but giving their land on rent or on sharecropping to others, and those who till their own land. In this sense, the category of landowners forms two and not one class. The relationship between landowners or landlords and tenants showed both continuity as well as conflict, even though the landlords and tenant were representatives of two different classes. There was often a continuation of this relationship over generations. The sources of conflicts that led to breakdown of relationship and pertain to share of produce and security of service, both subjected to legislative reform, yet always leaving some loopholes that could break down the relations. Using the Marxist terminology, relations of production. The author tells how these relations tend to overflow outside of the village, as many landowners are absentee landlords. When he comes to the study of power relations or politics, Vitali switches over to the procedural rather than the structural aspect of political institutions. Moreover, here too he ventures beyond the limits of the village boundary to enter into the regional arena of politics. However, he prefers to situate the processes within the formal structures of political institutions such as the panchayat, the factions mostly caste based and those based on political parties. The demography has become an important variable in the parliamentary democracy based on votes. In his analysis of the political process, he provides an incisive insight into the working of the Indian democracy at the grassroots and the role of caste in the power play. He comments there seems to be a two-way relationship between political parties and the local politics. On the other hand, parties tend to operate in terms of the local idiom, choosing, for instance, candidates from the local or locally dominated caste. On the other hand, local conflicts tend to adjust themselves to and fall in line with wider conflicts between political parties. The discrepancy between universalistic ideologies and the actual practice in which the political parties engage is related to the practicalities of the local situation that includes caste factions and other local conditions. Caste factions and other local conditions. The discrepancies between universalistic ideologies and the actual practice in which the political parties engage is related to the practicalities of the local situation that includes caste factions and other local conditions. More than abstract ideology, the parties have to counter each other on the ground and in the context of the local social situation, caste playing an important role. Very importantly, Bitele raises the question of how a democratic institution like Panchayati Raj that has a basically egalitarian ideology can coexist with an essentially hierarchical social structure. Ideally, the panchayat is supposed to operate through consensus, but given the caste faction and hierarchy, the structural conditions for such consensus was not present in the village. Since the panchayat enforces certain rules for social justice like compulsory presence of women and scheduled castes, the conclusion that is reached is that there are other locations of power in the village that bypass the panchayat. However, the author notes that because of the exercise of parliamentary democracy, there has been a transition of power from the Brahmins to the non Brahmins. The regions lie in the almost voluntary withdrawal from it by the Brahmins and the exclusion of the Adi Dravidas. The numerically and economically powerful non-Brahmins began to challenge the traditional authority of the Brahmins as the society brought in values of equality. The Brahmin felt humiliated and withdrew from the governance of the village, leaving the ground clear for the non-Brahmins. The author notes the rise of popular leaders with traditions of violence and having no education. In fact, in the situation under study, Bitale is more inclined to look at the role of organized violence rather than only factors such as economic and numeral power. The three main chapters of the book deal with the three aspects of caste, class, and power and also describe their interrelationship. The author prefers to look at class as a system of social stratification rather than, in the Marxist sense, as a source of conflict. Accordingly, class has been defined as hierarchically arranged social categories based broadly upon ownership or non ownership of the means of production. Further divisions are all based on the various structural positions with respect to ownership and control and types of services rendered during the process of production. An impediment in thinking of people belonging to distinct classes can be that the same person may function at different times in a different role, like one might be a sharecropper and landowner and laborer depending upon the situation. Moreover, conflict is located more in caste than in class, although the two overlap quite significantly. Although Betale lists some critical differences also, the major difference is that caste is a status group characterized by way of life and ritual value rather than occupation or economic status. It also has a tendency for fission and has been pro- proliferating over the years and has been proliferating over the years. Class, on the other hand, is more likely to fuse, especially for political action. However, as caste enters the arena of politics, it is also showing tendency for fusion, but not at all levels. Class is supposedly an open category and caste is a closed one, but in light of contemporary works, both these assumptions can be challenged. At the end of the monograph, the author traces in a succinct manner the historical developments taking place in this region and ultimately comes to the conclusion that although before the 19th century caste and class were almost synonymous with each other, in the present day context such cannot be said to be true. However, although major transformations are taking place in the power and structural position of the non-Brahmins, such cannot be said to be true of the Adi Dravidas who remain depressed. Conclusion: Bitale follows Weber's approach to social stratification in his analysis of the changing aspect in a village in South India. Caste, class, and power are the three aspects of stratification in a traditional society. The three overlap, which, however, is not the case in the modern society. How does the ethnography advance our understanding? Bitale carried out a piece of intensive fieldwork in a South India village examining its relationship with the wider world. Unlike the other studies of that time, he focused upon the study of social stratification, employing Weber's class. From that point of view, it was a real breakthrough that appeared in Indian anthropology and sociology. The concepts that emerged from this study are still a point of Indian studies. Further, Bitale provided a lead to the study of class system, an area that was largely ignored these days, for it was thought that Indian society was caste society in contrast to the Western society, which was class society. Bitale showed that both the principles of caste and class could be seen in Indian villages and then interrelationship is what which he works out in his study of Shripuram. The next ethnography focuses on one such group, namely the Palars in the same region. After that, we will discuss theoretical part of which the ethnography, Siva and her sisters, gender, caste, and class in rural South India is an example. This ethnography comes as an almost direct contrast to the first one in that it focuses not only on the untouchable caste but also reject the fact of false consciousness that the ones at the bottom of the ladder accept what is projected about them. The Palars, both men and women, especially the latter, have their own views on caste system and the world and are fully conscious of the fact of oppression. The data reported in this work was collected in 1987 and reflects and supports what Bitaille said in the 60s that caste and class were gradually pulling apart. Description of the ethnography, intellectual context. Karin Kapadia's book, based on painstaking research in Arulur village of Tamil Nadu, is focused on women and judgments made from their point of view. The gender perspective enables her to examine the effect of urbanization on the traditional values of the community. The author shows that there is not a single Hindu system of caste beliefs and religious practices. North India is different from South India, a point which was well developed in Louis Dumont's work. Louis Dumont's work. Fieldwork was carried out in Tamil Nadu using the local language. The author conducted observations and interviews with people. Analysis of data. According to Kapadia, the region Arulur contained more than 60 endogamous caste and subcaste that spread themselves across various class groups so that members of the same caste could be found in various strata. To quote, the wealthy Kshatriyas and Telugu Brahmins form an upper class, well-arts and better off Muthurajas and Kalars form an upper middle class, and the poorer Muthurajas and better off Palars form a lower middle class. Landless Muthurajas, Palars, and Christian Periyars largely form the indigent lower class. Kapadia in his work or in her work, Kapadia in her work describes the process of adapting high Brahmin values, which is related more to class than to caste, as middle order caste who adopt the Brahmanical value as a part of class mobility and not as a claim to be upper caste. The major focus of this book is on kinship from a gendered perspective. Agrarian relations have also been dealt with towards the end of this book, and also within a feminist perspective. The author carries on a comparative analysis of kinship relations among the upper caste Tamil and Telugu Brahmins and the lower caste non-Brahmin Tamils.